Let's just run through what you get in this kit. So you have your base and the centerpiece you take out, and obviously this is where you need to put your track and cut your sleepers either end. We then have a second overlay which you put on the top. You then have a third overlay which then fits flush with the track, and then you've got two center strips, one bottom base and one top base. You've got 6 roof truss supports, but you only need 5, so there's one spare just in case. End cappings, roof card, exterior framework, and there's the roof glass. The little grey strip is your top roof apex capping. Then we have the 4 side framework, and then we have the top roof supports, and then we've got some corrugated card for the roof. So this, the first one here is the top frame, this one there is the main frame, and then the final one is the side frame. So that's all the items you get in the kit, and ideally you need to prime most of all this kit, and I'll go through which bits to do. Nearly forgot this piece, didn't fit on the table, and this is 3 parts to the kit, which is the main frame undergarnish strip, the main frame side fascia panel, which will go along all the sides of the roof trusses, and then the bottom one is the top frame side fascia panel. Just makes it all look nice and tidy. These parts do need priming as well on both sides. So the roof trusses need to come out of their template, and obviously they need to be primed both sides. So you'll need to lay these down on a sheet of board or whatever you're going to do. Spray one side, allow it to thoroughly dry, turn over, and then spray the other side. I use a Halford's grey primer. I won't be using anything else because they look good just like that. And that's those. You'll also be required to prime both the roof supports and the side main frame. The corrugated card, now it's up to you, but I do supply corrugated card, so it's on both sides. O gauge tends to show more up, so you can glue these two together, and then you've got a corrugation on both sides. But they both sides need priming, and again allow them to thoroughly dry before you glue them together. Again, it's exactly the same with the top main frame and the side frame. And then obviously you've got the base overlay, which is the first part you don't need to prime. The center rail strip base overlay you don't need to prime, but then obviously then when you come to put the top level on, the top layer you do need to prime, and the center top layer you need to prime. And obviously your roof card frameworks, you can prime those as well, and also your end cappings. So there's a fair amount to prime, and obviously you can paint them afterwards in whatever colour you like. In fact, I think it looks good in just grey primer. So we'll go ahead and we'll start the build. First part is to take the masking tape off and remove the inner part of the frame. You don't need that. You can use it for putting paint and stuff on later if you want, but then obviously we're going to need to find a piece of O-gauge track and then fit it inside. What I tend to do is to allow it just to protrude out slightly either side, and then cut the sleepers off here because you want the track work going flush inside, and do exactly the same at the other end. So I'll go and find a piece of track and we'll do that. And there we have our piece of track. I've found a piece of old track lying around, which I obviously weathered ages ago, and just cut it to fit, and now that's in position. So the next job is to get the first overlay, which is the 2mm thick pieces, line them up so the holes match, and actually glue this in position. This will actually keep the track into position, but once you've done those and it's bonded, what I tend to do then is turn it over. As you can see, it's fallen out. I tend to put some masking tape down this side just to hold it in position, so it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to go and glue those two pieces together. When I've added the first base overlay, what I tend to do is then get the roof trusses out and actually fit them in to make sure that it's all fitted properly. Now these may be tight when you fit them in, and obviously when you come to prime these roof trusses, it's advisable just to draw a pencil line round the bases and just not paint the bottoms, otherwise you'll end up sanding them. It doesn't take much to do if that is the case, but as you can see they're all in position, so I'm going to allow that to dry, and then I'll do the top coat. But obviously the top one needs to be primed first, so what I'll most probably do is go out and prime that before I glue it into place. What I also do is obviously take out these side frame pieces from its template. They just pull out gently, and then obviously then you can fit them in to the two holes. One comes on the inside, one's on the outside. They are just loosely fit, and obviously they fit nicely. Don't want to be gluing them just yet because we've got to be painting them. And again, if you want to mask up, you can do, but I think from memory, the drawing, I think I allowed for a slight amount of paint to go on there. And again, you can do the same with the top roof support, but I won't be doing those because obviously I know these two are okay. I could do the other side and just make sure that's okay. But so far so good, and there you go. When that first base is dry, you could use the spare piece that came out of the center, and what I tend to do then is just lift this up onto there, so it actually allows you to then add some masking tape down this side while it's level. If you do it on the flat surface, you tend to find that it just slightly bows down, so it's easier to use this template, run some masking tape along that side, and then do exactly the same as this side. So that's what I'll do next. And there we have our mast underneath, and that's all we need to do. You can paint at the bottom if you want to. It's always worth priming and painting MDF, even though it's on the underside. I tend to just use an acrylic artiste paint, just give it a black coat and let it dry, and it protects the MDF as well. Now I've just loosely put the top base overlay on, and obviously the two pieces that go in the center track, just to show you, obviously because I've masked underneath throughout the whole of the track, so sometimes you can just mask on the outside and not on the inside. If you do the whole of the track like I've done, if you look through, you can see the underneath of the masking tape. So what you need to make sure you do is, before you glue these down, is just to get a paintbrush and just brush in there and paint it black, just so it doesn't show. But it's entirely up to you. I don't normally mask the inside of the track anyway, but I've only got thick masking tape, so I decided to do it. But it's entirely up to you, but a little bit of paint on there won't hurt. There you go. So what we'll do is we're going to now go and do some priming. So I'm going to go and prime the top base overlay, the roof overlays, the side supports, the roof supports, and also all the corrugated card. So there's plenty to do. Do it in a well ventilated area, and hopefully allow it all to dry fully, and then we can come back once that's all done. Now all these roof supports have some little holes at the top here and also there. They'll either be showing a hole or not. If you want to get rid of them, because these are for putting brass wire through to make it look like cable, if you want to get rid of the holes, just literally get a pin and push them through and they'll pop out, or leave them in and paint over them and disguise them. But the top ones may all come out, but it's worth just taking a pin and taking them all out before you prime them. So that's what I should do next. There you go. So I've removed the holes, and obviously just be careful when you're handling these, because obviously here there is not a very big amount of wood, so this is quite a long leg, so be careful you don't snap them. I have given you one spare one just in case, but if you just take your time and do them gently, then these will be good to go. All I've done is simply cut some strips from my masking tape, and I've just done about 5-6 mil taped at the bottom, so that will cover up those. And I'll do the same when we come to do the other side. For the top overlays for the base, obviously I've just used one piece of double-sided or masking tape and made it double-sided, stuck underneath and just put it on, so it's just stuck in the middle. Done that with all those 3 pieces. And obviously then the side pieces I've just added masking tape there, and the runners I've done exactly the same. So all those pieces I'm going to go and prime. Obviously I've still got to do all the corrugation, but I've only got one piece of spare board at the moment, so we'll go and do those first. Obviously it depends on the time of the year when you're doing this as to how long this will dry. And now I'm doing this in January when there's a nasty bug around, so they keep telling us. That will most probably be left in the cabin now. I brought it in here, some heat in here, that'll hopefully dry. So I'm now going to get another piece of spare wood and put all the cardboard on. Now unfortunately with the corrugated card you can't stick that down because obviously it's quite thin, so you're going to need to be very careful when you spray paint that. Don't spray too hard, otherwise they'll blow away. But just do one side, bring them in, allow them to dry. You might find they do curl up a little bit, and it might be worth then putting them under some weights like a book or some other pieces of wood or whatever for 24 hours just to try and dry out flat, and then paint the other side and then duplicate what you've just done for that. You want them ideally as flat as possible, and it is possible, so just take your time. So I'm now going to go and do the corrugation. Because we're doubling up on both sides, obviously we've got 12 pieces of card here, so there's quite a few pieces, so obviously you might need a larger piece of wood to put them on, and they may not all go together. But I think the cat's come to say hello. Cat, what are you doing? Yeah, not playing. Right, so I'm going to go and put these in the garage, and I'm going to spray these. Most probably find that a couple of these are going to go flying, but I'll do my best and then put these in the cabin to dry. So this is the fun part where you get all messy, get all black hands. All I've done is use some cheap artiste black paint, brushed it in all over. Doesn't have to be neat because it's going to all dry, and it covers the masking tape on the inside of the sleepers and also on the outside of the rails. I've got it on the wood, but it doesn't matter because that's been covered up. Obviously you'll get paint all on the rails, so just use a kitchen towel and wipe all your paint off there, allow that to dry, and then what I'll most probably do when it's dry is paint the other side underneath just to protect it as well. So there you go. Now you can go and wash your hands because Boris says so. Okay, so moving on from yesterday's priming, I've taken them up and turned them over and remasked. I've taken off the bottom base overlays. We don't need to prime the other sides because that's only just going to show on the top. So we've just got the roof trusses here. I have got the 6, obviously, although you only need 5. I'm going to prime all 6 just in case I have damaged one putting it all together, so it's worth priming it just to be on the safe side. Don't have to come back and redo all that. And then you've got your 4 side frames and your 8 roof supports, so they're all turned over and stuck down with some double-sided some masking tape, double-sided. I'm going to go into the garage and paint these. It's extremely cold. I think it's 0 degrees, but I have warmed up the can of primer, so I'll literally only be in there for 2 minutes, then I'll bring this back into the cabin. Cabin's nice and warm and toasty. There's heating on in here, so they'll dry nicely. And once I've done those, I'll turn my attention to doing the other side of the corrugated card. So that's the second side done. Come back from the garage. It's extremely cold, so I wasn't staying in there too long. They're now back in the cabin. Heating's on in here, and they'll dry nicely. And then I'll just move on to doing these. All I'm going to do is turn these upside down and go and paint these. Hopefully they're not going to curl up too much. They've not curled up hardly at all, as you can see. But I'll leave these to dry another 24 hours before I even think about gluing them together. But we'll go and paint those next. So that's the other side of the corrugated card, and as you can see, just a couple of them, the 3 long strips to the left and the top right, and a couple just starting to warp or bend, not warp, purely because of the paint on them. They may dry like that, but obviously then what I'll do is I will then put them underneath some plywood or wood or books or something, just to straighten them out for 24 hours before I glue them together. So move back to the roof panels and you'll see that after priming them, some of them have etching around the windows and some of them don't. Now the ones that have the etching around are the ones where you need to cut out your acetate glass and glue them around there, because then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the ones with non-etching to go over and glue over the top, so they hide the join of the glass. You'll also notice when you turn them over, you'll get a couple of mil gap between the top and the bottom piece. This allows for the overlap onto the roof, because obviously you don't want two corrugated roof sides joining. If you see, if it was joined together and that was at the edge of the roof, it would look a little bit weird. So we created it so there's a couple of mil overhang, so when it's on your supports it won't be noticeable. So you need to cut out all your acetate sheets and then glue them into the roof panels that have the etching. You use glue and glaze, just a small amount, allow it to dry, and then we can come back and glue the panels together. So that's all the windows glued. As you can see, they're just drying, and obviously if you turn it over, that's what you'll see. Obviously we've still got to put our framework around, so if you've got any excess glue that's just seeped out around the edges, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because you're going to be covering those up with the framework. So that's those done. So what we need to do next is to grab hold of the frames that don't have the etching and match them up to the corresponding panel, and make sure that you line up the windows exactly, and you should have I think it's about a 2mm overhang on one of the sides that you can then glue them together, and you'll most probably find they'll start to sort of like bend, because obviously you're using glue, and against a card it will go wet, and at some stage then you'll need to put them under a heavy weight to dry them out and flatten them and leave them like that for a good 24 hours. There's no point trying to glue these onto the roof when they're slightly bent. So I'm going to match the cards up and come back. So there's the corresponding card to this one, and obviously the window match up and the edges all match up, and there you'll see on the left hand side you've got your overhang by about 2 or 3 mil. So you want to be gluing this panel together and then replicating it on the other three. Right, they've all been glued together, and as you can see the overhangs are quite prominent, so just make sure you get the windows in the correct position. They've actually drying really well and flat, most probably because we've primed both sides. I think on the larger one that I didn't prime the underside, which most probably why they just bowed a bit, and I think the paint's helping. And also most probably the glue and glaze paint is glue and glaze glue is most probably a better product to use than PVA, which is what I used on the large Gresty about a year or so ago when that was built. So they're drying nicely, and they're actually drying quite flat, so I may not even have to put them under weights, but most probably will do, because they'll most probably when they start drying out. So then what we're going to do is we'll move on to the next stage. So while we're doing a priming on the main side fascia panels, I thought it would just be as easy to get hold of the external frames for the corrugation windows and give them a prime as well there, so they match the colour of the roof. So they don't need a huge amount of paint on them, and you only need to do one side because the other side's gluing down on against the glass. So I'm going to go and do those as well. So we primed the external roof framework for the glass panels, and all you need to do is trim these out and glue these in place. So that's what we'll do next. So I've used my zippy blade to cut out all the card frames, and I've got all my corrugated card. Now as you can see, this has the overlap side. Now this will be on the underside, so we need to make sure you turn them over and then literally get a hold of your framework and fit it in position. So I suggest adding some glue to the perimeter of each frame. For this I'm going to use the Deluxe Glue and Glaze, a small amount around the outside, and then use my tweezers to put them into place. So I'm going to go ahead and fit all those, and I'll come back and show you. So when you've finished doing the frames on one side, just turn them over and replicate exactly the same with the other side using the second sheet of frames. And there we have all the framework in place. So literally just added a tiny bit of glue, use my tweezers to put in place, and then what I used is I used one of these little cocktail sticks to literally push down in the corners to make sure it bonded onto the glass, and then if any glue came out, I'd turn it around the other way and just literally run it along the edge to get rid of any. So a little cocktail stick might come in handy to put them in. So I'm going to put those to one side and allow to dry, and they're ready to add to the framework. So the next step is to repeat the process, but this time with the side main frames. These are just purely corrugated card, and again we've primed them both sides. So it's simply a matter of gluing these together. This will give you your corrugation both sides. If you don't want corrugation both sides, you just want to put it on one side, then you don't need to glue these together. But I think it looks better in O gauge to have corrugation on both sides. So we're going to glue these together, and we'll come back after we've done that. So that's the side mainframe corrugated panels glued together. They glue it quite nicely, they're not bowing up, so I'm going to put those to one side. That's that part done. I'm going to then move on back to the base and fitting the top base overlay on. So we're back with the base. We've done the bottom base, the first base overlay, put the masking tape on and painted it all black to make sure when we do the top overlay nothing's going to show. Our next thing before we do the final base overlay is to fit the base plate into the center before we put the top overlay on. So you're going to need to add some glue to each of the sleepers, and then fit this in place, and then just perhaps put some weights on just to keep it down into place. Then we can go back and we can finalize and fit the top base. With the first center base fitted, we can now move on to fitting the final base overlay. None of this is glued down yet, but you need a very thin amount of glue. By putting these on and putting them in place, you're going to be very close to the level of the rail. So by putting in too much glue, you may go slightly above. So if you place this over the top first and run it over to the side, make sure that the holes are level, so you've got it correct. You can always use the roof trusses to put them in while it's drying. If you think that your base is going to be too high, the only thing we can suggest that you do, and is often a good case, is to cut off the top part of the chairs on the inner edge with a Dremel or something. This will be able to then, you'll be able to then slide your concrete panel in, and I did do that on the last one. I think from looking at this, I haven't put a huge amount of glue on, that I should be okay. So I'm going to risk it, but do check to make sure that your top overlay doesn't go above the rail height, otherwise your trains ain't going to go through. So just check that, and then I'm going to glue this in place, allow it to dry, and then what I'm most probably going to do is give it a concrete effect. At the moment it's a grey primer, doesn't quite look really authentic, so I'll most probably give that a paint of different colours, whites, greys and blacks and etc., to come up with a concrete effect. But I'm going to use a limited amount of glue to fit this in place. If need be, of course, you can always sand this little bit down. I've just sanded it a little bit, just take off some of that black paint to see if that helps. I've got enough room, but I've just sanded it, given it a light sand. It'll help key for the glue, and most probably I've just taken 0.001 of a mil off just to help as well. So that's done that. So that's something you can do if you need to. So I've glued this top overlay down, and I'm using some clamps to keep it in place while it dries, because it's right on the level of the rail. So I'm just going to try and make sure that that doesn't go atop. But say if you want to Dremel your chairs off just to be on the safe side, it might be worth doing that. I'm going to allow this to dry for a good 15-20 minutes. What I'll also do is obviously I'll take these roof supports back out. They are quite tight fitting in the holes, obviously because I've painted this part as well. So I'm just going to sand around the bottom of the base of the roof support so they can fit in a lot easier, glue them in place, and then we can fit the side frames and roof frames. But we'll allow this to dry for a good half an hour, and then we'll come back and do the rest. For the side frames and the roof cross members, I use the Deluxe Materials Super Phatic glue rather than the glue and glaze. I just find this gives it a little bit more of a stronger bond. You can use the glue and glaze, it works perfectly fine, but I just have this to hand and I'm working against the clock, so I thought I would use this and again recommend it. So the base is all dry, and then the next thing to do is to fit all these roof trusses into the holes. And I've sanded around the bottom 5mm and added some glue in the holes, and then made sure I push these all the way through down to the base. And obviously you can turn it over and check to make sure that they're as far as they go, because obviously what you want to do is make sure that they are correct, because when you come to add that support, you want to make sure that it's as fairly level as possible. You don't want them at different angles, and obviously because I painted these, they actually push into the slots really well, and I haven't used any glue. The only glue I've used is at the very end there and the very end there, because obviously it doesn't slot in because it's an end piece. So I'm going to now do the same piece this side, and then I'll do the top part of the frame. So then we'll have a framework, and hopefully these will all be in position ready to take the roof supports. That's all the 4 side framework pieces in place, and say held the ends on by some wooden pegs. I'm going to allow that to dry thoroughly, and then obviously then we can fit the roof supports here, here, here and here. So we've got 4 this side and 4 the other side, and again I must probably hold those in position by pegs as well. So but I'm going to allow this to dry for a good half an hour, make sure that I don't move those, and then we'll come back and do the roof. So it's time to move on and do the roof supports, and there's 8 there, 4 on each side, so it's just a matter of gluing it in each of the positions and fitting them. And again I'm going to use pegs to keep them in place while they dry. And I'll do both sides and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so that's all the roof support done. So what we need to do next is to get our undergarnish and side fascia panels, and we're going to be fitting those next. So the undergarnish goes under here to create a nice strip, and then your fascia plates will go across there and across there. Now it might pay actually to put the roof cladding on first, but I think the undergarnish strip I'm going to do first, because I think that'll make it a lot easier. So I'm going to go and get those strips, and we'll do those next. When you take out your side fascia panels and undergarnish strip, it might be worth just making a note on the side on a piece of paper which ones are which, because these are very similar in thickness, but they're not quite exactly the same. So all I've done is just stick them back in there so I know which one's which. So I've taken one out, and basically where that is going, it's fitting underneath here where the roof trusses protrude out, because obviously we've got the corrugated frame which is going to go all the way down the side. So this undergarnish strip literally fits like a soffit underneath, and what you'll find is it's slightly a bit too long, because I can't guarantee that you're going to get these all correct. I'd rather do it slightly longer, so it's about most probably 1 mil too long. So all you need to do is trim to fit, as it says on the template. So I'll just make a note here with a pencil, and then I'll cut it. and then obviously then glue it in place, and literally add a bit of glue under each, here, under there, under there. And I'm going to use my pegs to keep it in position while it dries. I'll let that dry, then I'll repeat the process with the other side. I can then move on to fitting the side mainframe panel. So I'm just going to go and mark that and trim it and come back and glue. So that's literally glued in place, and I've got my 5 pegs holding it. Leave it to dry for about 5 minutes, then I can take it off and do exactly the same to the other side. Now that we've added that soffit strip, we can now concentrate on adding this side corrugated panel, and as you can see, when we offer it up against the top now, it gives it a nice flush finish. So just move this out of the way, and then what you need to do is add some glue down the runners of your roof trusses as far as the horizontal bar. Do it also glue along the horizontal bar. Offer your corrugated panel back into position and secure in place with some pegs or something. Now I'm not going to put the pegs directly on the corrugation because obviously it will damage it, so I'm going to cut some strips of card to protect it while I do that. And obviously on the underside I've got those frames, so I've only got to do it one side. So I'm going to glue that into position, let that dry, and then we'll do the other side. So I've added glue to the roof trusses down as far as the horizontal bar, added glue along both horizontal bars, and now I'm going to add the panel on and then just put it in place, hold it in with some pegs with some card to protect. There, so as you can see, there's quite a few pegs. So I'm holding it on with 2 pegs at each end just to give it that added protection, and then 1 on each middle section, 1 on each post, and then I've also gone on the top and put the peg over. Now be careful you don't move that soffit strip and away from the trusses there, so just literally go in. So that's held in quite a lot of positions, and I'm going to allow that to bond for 10 minutes at least, maybe quarter of an hour, because obviously the corrugation may not bond everywhere, because obviously you might just get glue on the curved part, but I think with all that lot there, I think it shouldn't go anywhere, should it? So I'm going to leave that for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and take it off, and then we'll replicate the other side. Obviously when you've put all your pegs on, just turn it over and just run your eyes down the side of all the bars to make sure you've got no excess glue. If you have, wipe it away with a damp brush. But that's all looking good, and we'll let that dry. Side frames done, dried, done. So we now need to move on to complete the 4 roof panels. So I've got those to hand. We've got all the frames around the glass on both the outer and inner side, and obviously we have that lip which we need to make sure is on the outer edge, so when we fit it in place it's on the edge, and then obviously then when we fit our side fascia plate you'll only be able to see just 1 rather than 2. So I'm going to glue this in place, and obviously I'm going to add some glue along the 2 bars and then the 5 roof trusses as well. I've got my trusty pegs and my pieces of card that I used before. I can use pegs quite easily on the ends, but obviously the middle 3 are going to be a little bit harder. I'm hoping with a little bit of jiggery pokery I should be able to get a peg in there with a bit of luck and hold it in place, but care must be taken while doing that. So we'll go and glue this side and we'll come back. I've managed to get 3 pegs in there, but that was awkward, but obviously it's not holding this end, so all I've done is I've got a couple of bits of MDF and I've just pushed it down and held it there for a minute on each end. You can do that with both hands and 3 fingers. You can do that all at once, and it seems to bond quite quickly, the Superfatic. So I'm just going to allow that another 5 minutes and then take that off, and then we can do the top part. Okay, so we've done the first main roof frame, and we've got to fit the top roof frame. Now in this particular case I think it's going to be easier if we fit the side fascia plate first, and obviously add a bit of glue to the sides of all the roof trusses, fit it in position, line it up so you get it spot on with the underneath of the frame. Now obviously there is a long piece of wood that comes with your kit for the base. Now you could put that along there to give you a nice firm line for your light. It's not quite as long as the whole length, so you might have to do it in 2 stages, but it might help, it might not. I'm just gonna have a go and see how we get on. I'm going to glue that in position and then come back. When you add your glue to these roof supports, obviously you're not going to be able to put much on there. It makes sense just to let it go tacky, because you can't put pegs on this one because there's nowhere to clamp it on. If you clamp it on the fruit, it's going to bow. So just play around with it, and get some card or whatever you want to do. Now that long piece was just too long, so I'm not going to use that. I just use a small piece, and then what I've done is I've held it in position and then just put my piece of MDF to the side to make sure it's level. Did that all the way along, and then literally held my finger on there for 30 seconds, and it seems to have taken to that, so quite happy with that. So I'm going to let that dry for a few more minutes, and then we'll repeat the other side. Right, so I've added the side fascia panel on there. That's dried nicely and it's level. And I've done exactly the same the other side. And then what we need to do is to put the top roof frames on. Although this is showing a fully built one, I'm just going to quickly mention when you come to glue your 2 top roof panels on, you'll see that there is a indent into the top frame, and people might wonder what that is. Now I've put that there so if anybody wants to put a metal rod or anything through to add some lighting down, they can put it in there. It's not to be used for anything else. So obviously when you come to glue your top roof panels on, just ignore it and use the center of that gap to use as a guide. It's just there for if anybody wants to add a rod before putting the roof top panels on to add some lighting. So all the roof panels are on, and all we need to do now is to add the side fascia panel, and all you're going to be doing is adding some glue along the under soffit one and on the roof supports. Cut your fascia panel to size and then fit it in place, and you'll find that it should fit nicely on the end. Put it in position, hold it there for a minute or so, and then that's done, and that's nice and flush. Repeat that with the other side when you've done. Now that we've finished doing all the side frames, fascia panels, we can move on to the end cappings. Just cut these out. They're only held on at the very bottom with a small tag, and you can either prime these with a paint can or use a acrylic paint to paint them in the colour of your choice. I'm just going to keep these the same grey just to make it universal, and they glue on the ends just to cover up the end pieces of your framework. The roof capping is already a grey paper. Most probably won't bother painting that, and then just glue that on in place to cover the gap between the 2 roof panels. Next you need to get your apex roof capping. It is engraved to show as though it looks like individual tiles, and it's got a line down the middle. I just use a metal ruler and just fold it gently to try and give it a little bit of a curve. I'm going to then add some glue to the underside of it, and then I'm just going to place it over the center and cover the join lines between the 2 roof panels. Drop it into position at one end and then gradually work your way along, and then just check, make sure you've got it as level and straight as possible. Then just use your fingers to pinch along the lines and get it in, and hopefully that will dry on there, and that's done. So my end cappings have been primed and they're now dry. All that remains now is to glue these into position over the ends, and we've completed our mini Gresty build. And there we have our completed mini Gresty. I will, on the production model, add the holes on the end frame, so you can see, I think in there is some holes that allow you to put some rods to look like cabling, and they obviously need to come out at the ends here, at least at one end, but I will do both ends, so I'll add that to the production model. All that leaves it now is for you to weather it. It's a bit clean, but as this is just a production demo model, it's going to stay like this. And that completes our build. Thank you very much for watching. To those that have purchased, thank you again. Any questions or queries, please don't hesitate to contact me through our Facebook page, facebook.com/railway laser lines, or on the product support page on our website at railwaylaserlines.co.uk. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon with another how to build. Take care. Bye bye.